I think most of America that has watched these 2014 NBA Finals so far has come to the realization, just like I have through the first three games of this series, that this is a series and that both teams are in a dogfight and that the San Antonio Spurs can actually win this year's NBA Finals, beat the Miami Heat, become NBA champions. I don't think anybody will deny that, especially after the performance of the Spurs, in particular in the first half of game number three, setting an NBA Finals record for team field goal percentage in the first half. It was an outstanding offensive and shooting exhibition, the likes of which you've never seen, frankly, in the NBA Finals. It was just tremendous to see what the Spurs were doing in the first half. I do give some credit, though, to the Heat sticking around and hanging tough and trying to actually make a game of it when it probably, frankly, was just not meant to be their night. But now the Spurs are in the catbird seat. They've retaken home court advantage in the series. They have a 2-1 series lead. It looks like a lot of things are in the Spurs' favor, and it looks like the Spurs are basically halfway to an NBA championship. And I think that's partially true. I really do fully believe now, based off of what I've seen, in particular in the first three games, that the San Antonio Spurs can win this series, and that if they do the things necessary and do the right things and make the proper adjustments based off of what they should have learned from the first three games, that there's no doubt in my mind that the San Antonio Spurs will win this series. Now, when you look at the San Antonio Spurs and the Miami Heat heading into this final series, you knew that Miami's big three was better than San Antonio's big three. You'd rather have LeBron, Wade, and Bosh than Duncan, Parker, Ginobili. Let's be realistic. You also know that the Spurs are a superior team in terms of their depth, the fact that they can go 9, 10 deep and have 9 or 10 guys contribute in a certain role in a game situation. And they were also superior in terms of their overall team three-point shooting. Again, facts that I don't think really can be disputed. But as we look at the first three games, and I was watching game three in particular, and the horrible commentary that Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson were contributing, and there was all this emphasis and talk about defense and defense and defense and defense and defense and defense. And I get that this is the philosophy that people always believe that defense wins championships regardless of the sport, and there's something to be said for that. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to win based off of your offense. And let's not kid ourselves here. The reason the San Antonio Spurs won game three of the series, the reason the San Antonio Spurs have a 2-1 series advantage is not because of their defense. It is because of their offense. And I think in part it is understanding that the path to the San Antonio Spurs winning the NBA championship is not going to be found on the defensive end like a Greg Popovich might want, or a lot of NBA old school fans and hardcore fans might want to believe. The path to an NBA championship for the San Antonio Spurs will come on the offensive side of the ball. And I think based off of the first three games, you have clearly seen at times where the San Antonio Spurs can just run the Miami Heat out of the gym. And you've also seen other instances where the Spurs fall into some bad habits that some people think are great habits that have actually been detrimental habits that allow the Miami Heat to stick around in the game and allowed them in part to win game two of the series. Now, I understand that people associate the San Antonio Spurs with being this incredibly team-oriented organization and being this incredibly unselfish team. And their ball movement is tremendous. The way they share for others and they set up others is tremendous. The way they pass the ball is outstanding. That's how you want to teach kids to play. And again, in theory, yes, this is true. However, this is not the right path for the San Antonio Spurs. This is not the right way for them to go about winning 2 more games in this series and winning the NBA championship. The San Antonio Spurs have to, in my opinion, change their entire offensive approach. They have to change and adjust their lineups accordingly to be able to run to what they really, I feel, need to run in order to be able to beat the Heat 2 more times in the series and win the NBA championship. Now, I understand for so many years, the Spurs have been built around a Tim Duncan and a Manu Ginobili and a Tony Parker. being those three great stars. But let's really truly look at this objectively in the context of 2014. Tim Duncan, yes, one of the great power forwards, if not the greatest power forward of all time. Yes, perhaps one of the 10 greatest players in the history of the NBA. Yes, the greatest San Antonio Spur of all time. But that's a reputation built off of the past. That is a name largely built off of the past. We are talking about a 38-year-old Tim Duncan that is better at this point in small doses, that if you have to count on him too much and you have to rely on him too much, his game has deteriorated a little bit to the point that you end up falling into some bad patterns that allow the Miami Heat to stick around. You look at Manu Ginobili, that for so many years has been a critical member of what the San Antonio Spurs have done, been a part of several championship teams, been that force on the perimeter that can create off the dribble, that can stretch out defenses via the mid-range jumper and the three-point shot. But that's the Manu Ginobili that didn't have the huge bald spot on the back of the top of his head. This is not the Manu Ginobili of 5-6 years ago. This is a 35, 36-year-old Manu Ginobili who, again, his game is clearly in decline. Now, what I'm getting at here is if the San Antonio Spurs continue to do things the way that so many other people think is the right way to do things, and frankly, the San Antonio Spurs themselves probably think is the right way to do things, they will end up losing this series in 6 or 7 games to the Miami Heat. The way to the Spurs winning the 2014 NBA Finals is through creating an up-tempo offense, running the Miami Heat out of the gym. Excuse me, the Spurs have superior depth. They have superior talent on the perimeter, in my opinion, and they have to do a better job of taking advantage of that. You have to accentuate your positives and hide your negatives. And to me, with Tim Duncan playing 30-plus minutes a game and Manu Ginobili playing 30-plus minutes a game, the San Antonio Spurs fall into a lot of bad habits, a lot of pick-and-roll situations, a lot of overpassing that leads to some bad decisions, some bad turnovers, and shots that come far too late in the shot clock for the San Antonio Spurs to be optimally effective. They pass the ball far too much down low to Tim Duncan in this series, where it seems like his mid-range jump shot game has gone, and he's now become a back to the basket, pound the ball into the floor type of guy. That's not the path to success for the Spurs for the rest of this series. You are allowing the Miami Heat to relax on defense. You are allowing the Miami Heat to rest on defense. And you are trying to count on 2014 Tim Duncan as if this is 2003, 2005, 2007 Tim Duncan, and that is simply not the case. By going so much to Tim Duncan and playing Tim Duncan so much, who isn't contributing what a lot of people think he is actually contributing in this series, what you are doing as a San Antonio Spurs team is you are allowing the Miami Heat to relax on defense. You are allowing the Miami Heat to take it easy. You are slowing down the game at a time where you need to pick up the pace and run the Miami Heat out of the freaking gym. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to play Tim Duncan less. The only way you're going to be able to do that is also to play Manu Ginobili less. This is a guy that, is kind of, scatterwall at times, and that used to be great. But now it's kind of hit or miss. And again, with Manu Ginobili, you fall into the same old kind of habits where you sit there and you focus too much on the perimeter passing, kind of playing that hot potato game, creating too many late in the shot clock jump shots that the Spurs don't need to consistently take if they have any hopes of winning this series. You rely too much on him and Duncan running a two-man pick-and-roll game that, again, isn't producing a whole lot of positive results for you in this series. The Spurs must change their approach. They must change their mindset. One thing that has been clear to me throughout the 3 games of this series and should be clear to all of you is that when the Spurs seem unstoppable and when the Spurs seem at their most effective is when they have multiple guys creating opportunities for themselves and others off of dribble drive penetration. That is how you are going to beat the Miami Heat in this series. Not playing hot potato and passing the ball all around on the perimeter and backdoor cuts and posting up and playing screen roll. That's not how the Heat are going to lose this series. That is not how the Spurs are going to win this series. By continuing to do those same type of things, that they've done traditionally, the Spurs will find a way to piss a golden opportunity down their leg, just like they did in 2014. They must adjust their lineup. They must adjust their mindset. They must realize that the Heat are not as great of a perimeter defensive team as they have been over the past couple of years. They must realize that the Heat are not that deep of a team, just like they have been for the past couple of years. And that in order to maximize on their negatives and accentuate your positives, you must take advantage of the numerous guys that could create shots for themselves and others off of the dribble. The path to the San Antonio Spurs winning this series to me is very simple. They need to go to a primary five-man lineup that plays at least each of the players 30 minutes a night, and all five of them at least 20 to 25 minutes a night. They need to go smaller. They need to change their whole approach and mindset and adjust to the Heat and the weaknesses, of the Heat, and adjust to what is working for them. When the Heat have created shots for themselves and others off of dribble drive penetration into the paint, they have been effective. They have been incredibly effective. You saw this play out in the first half of Game 3. A lot of people are going to sit there, well, they weren't missing shots. They were hitting everything. But how were so many of those quality shots created? It wasn't off of 5, 6, 7, 8 passes. It was off of dribble drive penetration, creating open, easy shots and layups, or creating open, uncontested jump shots and three-pointers. To me, the lineup that the Spurs have to go with for game number 4 and on the rest of the series, the primary lineup has to be Danny Green at the 4. Has to be Danny Green at the 3. Kawhi Leonard at the 4. Boris Diaw at the 5. Tony Parker at the point, and Patty Mills at the 2. If you sit there and say, well, that's a very small backcourt. Well, it's not exactly like the Miami Heat have a monstrous-sized backcourt anyways with Mario Chalmers and Dwayne Wade. What it does ensure by having two guys in Parker and Mills that can both be able to create opportunities for themselves and others off of dribble drive penetration is it forces Dwayne Wade to have to defend one of those guys man up on the perimeter at all times. Therefore, hopefully taking away some from his offensive game as well. But you're also capitalizing on a Dwayne Wade that is not the defensive player that he once was. By having a Danny Green and a Kawhi Leonard and a Boris Diaw on the floor, you were ensuring that a Chris Bosh has to defend somebody on the perimeter. You were ensuring that a Chris Anderson, if he's in the game, has to defend somebody on the perimeter, which is really an advantageous situation for you. If you've got Boris Diaw with the ball on the top of the key, how is Chris Anderson, Birdman, going to stick with him, as Diaw tries to drive and penetrate? Diaw has been an X factor in this series. He has been a killer, matchup nightmare on the offensive side of the game for the Miami Heat that they can't match up with. Now you also force LeBron James to have to guard somebody throughout the entire game or the primary portion of the game that can create his own shot off the dribble and create shots for others through dribble drive penetration. You can't really just hide LeBron on Danny Green because he can do that to a certain degree. If you put him on Kawhi Leonard's going to be able to do it. If you put a LeBron James on a Boris Diaw, oh my God, what does that say about the Heat's chances? They're putting LeBron James, one of the premier defenders in the entire league, on a Boris Diaw. But again, you have a team of 5 San Antonio Spurs that could shoot. You have a team of 5 San Antonio Spurs that can handle the ball. You have a team of 5 San Antonio Spurs that can each create their own shot off of the dribble through dribble drive penetration and be able to create open, uncontested jump shots and easy shots for other teammates without having to play the hot potato, without having to slow it down. What this lineup does, in my opinion, is allows the Spurs to control things at the pace and tempo that they need to. They need to consistently score over 100 points a game to win this series. They need to capitalize on their superior depth. You could still bring in Duncan and Splitter and Ginobili and Bellinelli and hell, even Bonner for certain stretches of the game. But to me, if the Spurs keep trying to sit there and play the style that they do a lot of times in the regular season, the style that they've played over the years in the playoffs of being a half-court, disciplined, pass the ball, share the ball at one extra pass type of offense, they will lose. And they will find a way to piss this series down their legs when they have a golden opportunity to win one more championship, win one more ring. It will be incumbent, in my opinion, upon Greg Popovich to recognize the reality and truth of this series, to recognize and understand that the truth of how his team is going to win in this series has changed, and it is incumbent upon him to change and adapt. Otherwise, to borrow a phrase from the wrestling world, his Spurs will ultimately perish in this series. Passing and ball movement is not how the Spurs win in this series. It comes through dribble drive penetration, creating easy shots for themselves and others, where the Heat are not the same perimeter team that they once were. Therefore, they struggle to defend a team, especially a team if you put 5 ball handlers on the floor. You don't have to worry about the Heat and their size down low because Chris Bosh is primarily a perimeter player now. Chris Anderson is a nothing as an offensive player. And in terms of defense, you would force both a Birdman and Bosh, if they're on the floor at the same time, to have to guard guys on the perimeter. If the Spurs do these changes that I'm talking about, they de-emphasize Duncan and Ginobili. They emphasize the guys that they need to emphasize, these younger, more athletic slashers and dribble drive penetrators. The Spurs can not only win this series, in my opinion, they can win this series in 5 games. I can't wait to see how the rest of the series plays out. I can't wait to see which team is able to adjust better and make the proper and necessary adjustments. I think the Spurs will win this series, but in order for them to do that, they must make the adjustments that I've talked about in this video, period.